Hey, what's up? Welcome to Lawsplaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And today we're here to talk about what is going on with Cuba Gooding Jr. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Cuba Gooding Jr. has been arrested and charged with 2 counts of sexual misconduct. One, a misdemeanor sexual abuse charge, and another, a forcible touch in the state of New York for activity that went on at a New York bar back in June. Back in June, he allegedly groped a woman's breast while sitting at a bar and conversing. Thankfully, TMZ acquired the video, the surveillance video from the night in question, and we can actually take a look at that, which we're going to do in just a minute. But needless to say, the last time Cuba's hands got him in this much trouble, he was uppercut into orbit by Brian Dennehy. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but you should check it out. It's pretty good. That being said, let's take a look real quick at the 2 charges. The first one is here. It is sexual abuse in the 3rd degree. So a person, this is from New York. This is New York Penal Code 130.55. And it states that a person is guilty of sexual abuse in the 3rd degree when he or she subjects another person to sexual contact without the latter's consent. Except that in any prosecution under this section, it's an affirmative defense that such other person's lack of consent was due solely to incapacity to consent by reason of being less than 17 years old, and such other person was more than 14 years old, and the defendant was less than 5 years older than such other person. I don't think Cuba Gooding Jr. falls into being somewhere around the 17-year-old mark. So we can just ignore that last part, but focus on they subject another person to sexual content without their consent. Okay, so that's the first charge. That's what the New York prosecutor is going to have to prove against Cuba Gooding Jr. Here is the second charge, and these are things to keep in mind as we review the video and I'll kind of talk. There's no audio during the video. It is a surveillance camera, so I'll kind of talk through it so we can take a look. It's a little bit grainy and from a distance, so we have to, kind of use the same tools that the jury is going to have before them. They're going to be watching the same video and drawing their own conclusions. But here's the next law. This is forcible touching. Again, this is New York Penal Code 130.52, subsection 1. That's specifically the charge for Cuba here. A person is guilty of forcible touching when such a person intentionally and for no legitimate purpose forcibly touches the sexual or other intimate parts of another person for the purpose of degrading or abusing such person or for the purpose of gratifying the actor's sexual desire. So this is what we have to keep in mind as we review the video. Before we take a look at it, and we will in just a second, before we take a look at it, I want to point out that the New York prosecutor's office has come out and said that they plan to introduce testimony from up to 12 other women who said they have been sexually touched or groped or pinched or grabbed or whatever by the wandering hands of Cuba Gooding Jr. Okay, there's one thing that they'll have to deal with here as prosecutors, and I'm sure they have a plan for this, but I'm also sure that Cuba's attorney has a plan to counter this as well. But it's a New York Rule of Evidence, Rule 4.21. This is evidence of crimes and wrongs. So what they're going to try and do is say that, look, Cuba has touched or groped or grabbed or pinched or fondled or whatever, colorful language they want to use, these 12 other women, and we're going to bring them in here even though they weren't present at the bar when the alleged event occurred. We're just going to have you come in and hear their story, right? This is a common tactic on Twitter, especially. This is the new social media trial methodology, right? We're going to parade in a bunch of people who have a story about someone, and we're going to listen to that story, and then we're going to use that story to infer whether or not this person did something on this day, on this particular day at this particular time. There are all kinds of problems with this, and that's why there's actually a rule of evidence against it, both in New York State court and in federal court, and pretty much every other state. In New York, it's called the Molyneux rule, and no, it has nothing to do with that Molyneux. It's a different one. But anyway, so evidence of crimes or wrongs or other acts committed by a person is not admissible to prove that the person acted in conformity therewith on a particular occasion or had a propensity to engage in a wrongful act or acts. This evidence may be admissible when it's more probative than prejudicial to prove, for example. So here's a list of exceptions. And these exceptions are usually in conjunction with other crimes than a misdemeanor touch. But maybe they're going to try and argue this. But here are the exceptions. Motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, common scheme or plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake or accident, or conduct that is inextricably interwoven with the charged acts, or to provide necessary background information or explanation, or to complete the narrative of the subject event or matter. So what this exception is for is, let's say there's a bank heist, right? Or a premeditated murder or a planned assault, something like that. And there are some other wrongful or criminal acts that lead up to the actual commission of the crime. And it's important for a prosecutor to give background information to a jury about how this crime occurred, how it unfolded, how the planning was done, all of those things. You're not saying that this person stole a knife to prove that they later stabbed someone with the knife. That stealing of the knife isn't used to prove the actual stabbing that takes place. The stealing of the knife is to prove that they had the murder weapon in question. Or the attack weapon, whatever you want to call it, right? They have the weapon in question. You're just proving that they have it in their possession. And the way that they acquired that is that they stole it from a store and you have it on a surveillance camera. That doesn't go, the act of the theft doesn't go towards proving the truth of the assault. It merely goes to establish how they acquired the weapon. Similarly, if they're using some sort of illegal method of communication, that might be how they formulate the plan, but that doesn't have anything to do with how they actually commit the act. That's what these exceptions are for. These exceptions are not typically intended to parade forth a bunch of witnesses to say, oh, look, he has a pattern of groping people because he groped me at this time that you cannot prove, that is not on trial, and that we don't get to call witnesses for at this other date. That's not how this tends to work. And in fact, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s attorney has said that he's going to attempt to try any charges separately. There's another accuser who's come forward as well, and the New York prosecutor has actually added the same 2 charges in reference to that accuser. And so Cuba's attorney is trying to have both trials tried separately. That way a jury isn't able to improperly draw an inference that if there are 2 accusations, that's somehow more credible. Again, this is how our Twitter brain works, right? Oh, there's more people saying it, they must be true. This one must be true because someone is saying something similar happened at some other time. That's not how the law works. That's not how the law is supposed to work. That destroys the presumption of innocence. And unfortunately, for everybody trying to pull this off, you can't, how do I word this? It destroys the presumption of innocence, and you don't get to prove one thing happened because another thing happened. If you ran a red light on Tuesday, it doesn't mean you run a red light on Thursday. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. The situation's different. And importantly, in this scenario, at least with regards to the up to 12 women that the New York prosecutor is attempting to say they will bring forward, with this scenario, we don't even know that he actually ran the red light on Tuesday. We just have someone coming out and saying that a celebrity touched them in a manner that is inappropriate. We don't necessarily know what that means. We don't get to test we don't really get to rigorously test the accusation or anything like that. And we don't have an independent jury determining whether or not that happened. Interestingly, This rule is so strong that even if he was convicted of 12 prior gropings, even if he had actual convictions for 12 prior gropings, it still would be presumptively inadmissible, and the prosecutor would have to find some interesting way to bring this out. Typically, they would have to wait for Cuba to testify on his own behalf and try and raise the defense that he's never done this before or something like that, that they could then use a prior act to impeach his statement, impeach his own testimony. They can't just spring this on him out of the blue. And they've already announced that they're going to try, so they'll be on guard for it as they go into it. But that's an interesting hurdle that they'll have to overcome. But enough waiting. Let's take a look at the video and we'll see what the jury is probably going to look at. Maybe there's a better copy out there. I doubt it. So they're probably going to be looking at this video and then relying on the trustworthiness of all of the witnesses involved, including potentially Cuba, his date, anybody else who may have been there, security, etc. So let's take a look at it. Again, this video was acquired by TMZ and their branding is still on it. I would never want to take that away from them, but let's, all right. So there's Cuba and he's sitting down with his date, Claudine. Whoever Claudine is, I have no idea. And this person sitting down now is the accuser. So you can see Cuba, he makes a reach here. He apparently touches her leg. That seems to be apparent. He's not accused of doing that. What he's accused of comes right here. His hand moves up towards her chest area. She claims she's groped there. He then pulls her hand and looks like he makes to kiss it. And they're discussing things here and they're still sitting. Then this weirdo comes in. And he's gonna... This is the part of the video that's a big problem for the accuser, in my opinion. The accuser is here. She doesn't appear to have a negative reaction to being groped. This guy is gyrating his crotch. Cuba may have groped his penis there. That's kind of interesting, but who knows what's going on with that. But now we have people talking. There's general commotion. The accuser's still there. You can see her still sitting there. She's the one with the blurry face. I don't know if that's a genetic condition or whatever, but she's the one with the blurry face and is still there, seemingly not reacting to the fact that she was sexually assaulted. At least this is what I would be arguing if I were Cuba Gooding Jr.'s lawyer. Look, if she was sexually assaulted, there are ample people there to alert about this. She doesn't leave the proximity. She doesn't go grab a security guard. None of this happens. None of the things that you would expect someone who was assaulted to do. This person doesn't engage in any of that behavior and in fact remains until after Cuba stands up and leaves. This is about the extent of that video. So we can get rid of that. Now there is a subsequent video that happens down in the hotel lobby and it's about 40 minutes later. Cuba is sitting on the couch with Claudine and they're kind of making out a little bit. The security guard who is in the frame of the video we just watched is standing there near Cuba Gooding Jr. And the woman, the accuser, comes and approaches the security guard and begins to say something. There's no audio to that video. Cuba stands up and he sort of stumbles and then walks away. He doesn't confront the accuser. She doesn't confront him. It's impossible to know exactly what was said. That's the type of stuff that will be relayed in testimony at trial. But I want to point out, I'm not showing that video because it doesn't really give us any relevant information to the case at hand. We know that it happens about 40 minutes later in a different location and that there is no real contact between the accuser and Cuba Gooding Jr. So really, what we have to examine is the video we just watched. And we have to determine, as a jury, right? We have to determine whether or not Cuba Gooding Jr. intentionally touched this woman's intimate areas. Breasts are typically considered intimate areas. If he touched this woman's intimate area for the purpose of either degrading her or providing sexual gratification for himself, and therefore subjected her to sexual abuse. That's kind of how this this whole thing is going to work. Of course, this is criminal court, so they have to prove this beyond any reasonable doubt. And if they can, then he's guilty. And if they can't, then he's not guilty. Cuba's in a very interesting position here, because in some cases, it is better to be criminally charged with a sexual type allegation, at least in today's day and age, because you get the chance to go to court. You have the highest possible hurdles for the accuser to overcome, or in this case, the state to overcome in its accusation of you. And you have the most possible defense available to you being the defendant in a criminal trial. You have the maximum amount of rights, and the state has the highest burden. And if you win at criminal trial, especially a public one like this, Cuba's criminal trial is obviously public. People are starting to hear about this news. And so the results of this are going to be big news for Cuba. If he's guilty, they will be devastating. That will be devastating to him, especially it will give credibility to the idea that he groped apparently 12 other women prior to this. If he is found not guilty, especially as the New York prosecutor has already announced their plans to bring forward all these other accusers, it will venerate him. It will vindicate Cuba Gooding Jr. in his consistent maintenance that he is not guilty of any crime and that he did not do anything wrong in this situation. So we'll have to keep look on it, but I know you guys have probably seen this pop up in the news and wanted to explain the various laws that are at play here, what the jury's going to be looking at as far as evidence. Of course, they will hear testimony from people who were there, including Claudia, most likely. That will likely be the biggest witness for Cuba Gooding Jr. will be his date who was there and the security guard. Typically, I shouldn't say typically, but often you don't want to have a defendant testify and make their own defense because, like I said before, they could make a statement that then allows the prosecutor to impeach their testimony and enter in evidence that may otherwise be inaccessible to them. So what you do in that situation is you utilize friendly witnesses like the security guard. Security guard is going to be a credible witness. They're professional, they're observant. They have an air of credibility before a jury. His date is going to be a I would suggest highly credible witness, especially since he seems to be with that date in a intimate sort of capacity, as is revealed by the later video where he's making out with her on the couch. So if she is suggesting that he did not engage in any sort of groping of another woman who approached him at the same time when they were together, that will be a big boon in his favor. Assuming he hasn't broken up with her and pissed her off or something. That would be unfortunate. She'll really quickly become a state's witness. Now, I kid, but that is something that happens sometimes. If you have a friendly witness and you have an interpersonal conflict, you can really ruin that, and that can damage your case. But anyway, I wanted to bring this out to you guys, show you what's out there right now, and provide my little mini analysis of it. Of course, a jury is going to hear arguments about the facts and arguments about the law and testimony that we don't have right now, but I'll be following it. So if there are any really interesting updates, I will certainly do a video on them. If you like this type of stuff, please go ahead and click like, share the video. If you know other people who are interested in Cuba Gooding Jr.'s criminal case, share it to them so they can watch the video that we just watched, they can hear the analysis, they can read the law themselves, and they can make up their own minds. All right? Thanks for watching. Have a good night. Talk to you later.